This film records a discussion with the filmmaker Wilf Thust about play and work that took place in Mayday Rooms in December 2013. Wilf introduced that meeting with two films he had made in 1973 in and around the Notting Hill Gate Adventure Playground in London. The first film, shown here, is a silent 8mm film. The second is a 16mm film with sound. Then follows the discussion about play and work, about play work and youth work, and about film and video work with young people.
Publication about playgrounds from 1972 says, "Fencings devise an acceptable barrier that will keep people out of an adventure playground when it's supposed to be closed, and provides children with activities in a world of their own that gives them a sense of comfortable enclosure. There is gaiety in the air somehow at this adventure playground, and you feel it as soon as you enter through the gate from the dreary street of the poor and worn-out neighborhood."
The young people between 13 and 20, standing outside the gate, look nostalgically backwards to their childhood and forwards with feeling that they will be deprived of the better things in life. We met 13-year-old Sylvester, here between street and playground, moving on an old bicycle with fashionable handlebars.
What do you think about the playground? Like when you go there to play?
Well, I never go there to play. I go there to play cricket.
And what else?
And to see you lot sometimes.
And what about the other people?
To go and see my friends.
You remember the situation of how you ended up in the zone, right? And about the friends and all that sort of. But you could perhaps start with the situation of the teacher. Can you do that?
Yeah. I was in my math lesson, right? And a girl ran out of the class. And he went after the girl to get her back in the lesson. And I stood behind the door. So when he came back, I wouldn't let him in. So he was saying, "Sylvester, let me in." So I was forcing all my strength. And he pushed it right, and he squashed me. And he digged me, mum, I made a hole in my leg. And I go to the headmistress. And she suspended me. She gave me a letter to give to my dad. And I came in very late in the night, about 11. And he beat me because I never asked him. And he beat me, so I ran away.
The area around the playground consists mainly of workers' families, and most of the parents are immigrants from the West Indies. They came to Britain in their thousands in the 1950s because of a labour shortage in Britain after the war. They came from an impoverished black Commonwealth country to find opportunity, but instead found themselves with the lowest paid jobs in England. Most of the parents in this area say, "We want our children helped towards a better future." Black community says, "Our black children are being socially killed daily by British democracy, tolerance and fair play."
Neil formulates for Summerhill. The whole idea is to be yourself. Children should be free. We shouldn't interfere, say and preach. Let the children solve their own problems. Francis read theology and philosophy at Cambridge before coming to this place. He is patient, careful, always there, outside and on the children's side. He represents Neil's idea and lets things happen and lets the children solve their own problems.
Frustration comes in finding out that black people have a general guideline, a discipline, goal they want to reach. 20 years old Patrick expresses about his youth. "Since I have been in this country, I've never had a true English friend. There was always this patronizing air about my English colleagues. Barbara plays with Alex, who hasn't got a job. Barbara, wild and clever, asserting her beauty. She physically knows how to deal with people, but isn't taught to articulate in abstract terms. Fuck off means 1,000 times, 1,000 things. Fuck off.
The house opposite the playground has an important influence. It is a commune for 16 to 24-year-old blacks. These kids are unstable in menial and dead-end jobs.
They are very disgusting boys. They're always making love to girls, battery girls. 10 on to 1. Well, that is very bad and it stinks. They ought to go in prison.
They what?
They ought to go in prison, all of them. I can't stand going in there. Only time I go in there, and that's for fun, just to spy.
Sylvester likes to be photographed and interviewed. Acting stands for his longing to be what he can't reach.
Oh, well, I like to be famous.
He left his home, the school, the playground, and he will leave the reception home soon. There are not many possibilities for him. A Borstal is one.
In comparison to Sylvester is Vaughan and the group around him. The playground covers them like a paradisic island against outside problems, though they know that from this island they will gain nothing. Just hanging around with this feeling of dissatisfaction makes them overconscious and aggressive towards anything which breaks in from the outside. In this case, towards the cameraman, Wilfrid. They know Wilfrid, but hate to be photographed without setup or pose. It strips them further, revealing their real selves, which they can't bear to see.
The playground is closed. 14-year-old boys play at touching Liz's breast. The playground encourages touching. Touching is understanding. Touching is sex. Touching is immediate possession.
Touching instead of education. Touching without chances develops aggression against the unreachable.
Against the camera.
Against the better world.
Against me.
Against you.
These two films you have just seen were at the start of Wilf's involvement with Four Corner Films in East London. He was a co-founder of this group, together with 3 other members who met at the London International Film School. Anthony Davies, with a group of young people in Bethnal Green, joined Wilf's cinema workshop in Four Corners in the early 80s. He was 16 then, but that experience influenced him, and much later contributed to the setup of Mayday Rooms, a collective committed to recover and activate the history of politically marginalised groups.
I'm involved in Mayday Rooms, and I'm not going to give a lengthy introduction to that now. I'll talk about that after. If anyone's interested, I think we can have a quick discussion about that. It's a nice way there. Sorry.
Well, you get sidetracked.
You get
all sorts of things.
Yeah. So now I've lost my track. Now I've lost it. But the only thing I've said about Mayday Rooms is I think that one of the reasons why we were set up was really to respond to what many people now regard as a crisis facing historical material, which is to say that the cuts, the austerity cuts, certainly in a number of institutions have led to, if not neglect, the destruction of a lot of social history, and I'll talk about this later. And part of what we'd like to do with Wilf over many years, we're here for a long time, is to kind of reopen the account on some of these histories and connect them possibly to more contemporary debate and more contemporary struggles facing children and adults. So I'll talk about that later. But first, I just want to respond to this idea of being scraped off the tree, which I think is a...
I'm very, very, very apologetic.
No.
It did kind of come out. It's really the wrong term.
Okay. Well,
it's good that you picked that.
It wasn't you, but let's talk about. I think vocabularies are going to be very interesting for us today. I think we were threatened with being the generation left school in 1981, and around the late 70s, early 80s. This is my very brief introduction. We were being scraped off the street, but not by Wilf. At the time, by the National Front, and in Bethnal Green, if you were a young 14-year-old. Though you were growing up on estates that were principally mixed, there wasn't really a vocabulary to kind of describe this new world that you were in. It wasn't white, it was very mixed. And nevertheless, outside our schools in Bethnal Green, we had skinheads who were putting a lot of pressure on us to go to Brick Lane, and at the time it was referred to as hacky bashing.
And it was on to destroy all stalls of Bangladeshis. There was a pressure on children of my age to packy bash. For many of us, Four Corners became a sanctuary, a place we could go and develop our vocabularies that reflected our experience on the council estates with mixed communities. So the first film we saw there was The Harder They Come, and then we saw Jubilee, and then we got the beginning of a vocabulary of resistance. So for me, going back to those long, dark, very violent days, the question today might be to consider how an organisation like Four Corners really functions.
These are things that we were compelled by force of law to go to. We had to go to these things in Mile End, all over East London. And then suddenly there was this other place where we could enact and develop not just the vocabularies, but also the violence, to begin to understand the violence for the first time. So the reason I kind of went back was to really try to find out how that came into being, what it produced, and how it might connect to the present. And so my very brief introduction should end there, because I know there are lots of people in this room that are working in the present and very effectively, so I'll stop. And we'll go around if you want. You don't have to, there's no compulsion.
I enjoyed the films a lot, but what we maybe remember in a way was that maybe it's to do with film and video, and I'm sure you remember at the time there were differences between the two media, and that the work that I was involved in more in the 70s was in one sense was different from the flavour that I got from Where's the Gaiety, which is that as a slight sense of alienation that you felt as a film worker from the young people, so that there was this sense of oppression. but the work that I was involved in was more trying to use video in a way that was very involving and participative. So that actually the incident that I remember in relation to health and safety was spending a whole evening filming with a group of kids lumps of expanded polystyrene dissolving in paint stripper, which was like a sort of, it was like an early anti-global climate change video with these sort of icebergs of polystyrene dissolving, and it was very absorbing, and we shot that, for a couple of hours and paid it back to ourselves and then parted, and the tape was lost and all that.
I think I was interested in relationship to, I guess, the work that Tony was working on in relation to you. What we just saw was that there was a stillness in the Where's the Gaiety. Like, I wondered if you could talk a bit about why there was no moving image, and it was all, as far as they were all still, there were pans, but everything was still, with voiceover, which was something that I feel like I'm quite interested in, like what collectivity or what collaboration might look like, and there was a sense in that there was a real separation in a way between the filmmaker and the subject. Whereas in the stuff you were making, there was a much more of a passing around of the camera and the authorship. And I just wondered if you could talk maybe a bit about that in relation to Where's the Gaiety. Like I wrote down when you were making the film, who did you think would watch it, and what was your intention, and maybe a bit about the process of making it as well.
Well, I mean, there are 2 or 3 things to say. One is that I came from Germany. I could hardly speak English. Even the film school, I used the film school to learn English, and I missed out on endless kind of wonderful lectures because I couldn't understand what the hell they told me about. I was on this playground. I felt lost because in a way, it was like I didn't know what to do and what I was there for, and I had my own problems internally, kind of thinking back on, so I was really quite a lost entity. And you can see me here, sort of. That's how I was looking at the time. So, and it was only because of the friends that I had that I was pulled into it, because I was interested in playing and all this sort of thing, because I'm essentially, I think, quite a creative guy. But I was drawn back by also astonished. I mean, I was introduced to black people. I've never seen black people before. I've never met any Jewish people before. So it was quite interesting for me to go to film school. There were 5 Jewish students, and we communicated, at least I sort of, and the whole kind of world of outside Germany was suddenly kind of coming on to me. So I obviously kind of just took this in as it came to me. And I needed sort of the support system that these people that I happened to know were. And I just absorbed what was there, very much as an observer. And that comes over, obviously. And I didn't really want to I didn't want to intrude or want to do anything like the camera for me. And the whole problem of filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, came over me instantly is why are you there? What are you doing? What do you want to do? That's part of filmmaking throughout. I mean, filmmaking is to do with trying to find out. It's the inside out. You want to try behind the curtain. What is there going on inside the houses? I mean, Hitchcock, they all did it. I mean, that's what filmmaking is sort of about. You're curious. But in a way, how do you do it with people? I mean, there is a certain barrier. And I was more conscious then than I am now, because I see young people waving the camera wherever. But at that time, I was very much thinking, whom do I actually put the camera at? And some people don't want it, psychologically also feel locked in and prisoned somehow. So all this sort of was in my head, so I was approaching it very carefully by being around, but the camera wasn't the first thing, I was sort of part of it. But basically it was me standing around taking in what there is. And the other shock that I had was that despite all possible niceness and adventure and play with fire and with whatever, on this playground, that I came across people who said this is all shit, this is not doing anything good. And despite for me trying to find out what was going on, this was a real blow. This was a real blow to my expectation of an adventure playground. Coming from the Cayman Islands, Frank McField, the young sociologist working at this playground, explained to me the situation of black working class people here, particularly of the situation of teenagers who are still hanging on, moving in and out of the playground, but by law shouldn't be there. Where are these people now, I asked myself. People who couldn't get any jobs at the time. What happened to them? Frank recently became a politician and writer at the Cayman Islands after himself spending years being unemployed, as I discovered in Facebook. German blonde, politically engaged, working class Annegret became his girlfriend at the playground when I was there. She had experienced Neil's anti-authoritarian education in Summerhill, but didn't like the influx of posh people there. She was my colleague in the secondary school in Germany and got me interested to go to the playground in the first place. Eventually, it was her to give Frank the chance to write his thesis for a PhD at the new and socially orientated university in Bremen, Germany. This morning I went to the Notting Hill Adventure Playground again after more than 40 years and made photos of the hoardings surrounding a building site for new housing. Part of the playground is still functioning, but on the hoardings, young, smiling, white and black people invite you to hurry up, to buy new flats before it is too late. What happens to those who cannot afford it, I thought. And where and how do the children play now? I had to take in and digest a lot in the 70s, and I only stayed for 3 weeks and then for short periods on this playground. I wanted to bring out what I had experienced. So it became a sort of thesis in pictures. It is a report to people concerned with socio-political questions.
What did the kids think of the film when they saw it?
Well, I mean, I didn't really. Later on, we said in Four Corners, we always showed films back and so on. That was part of the policy. We showed it to the people who were involved with the making. Sylvester saw it.
What was Sylvester's comment? Did he have a comment?
Well, I think he appreciated it very much because he liked to be an actor.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, I mean, when he phoned from New York, it is later life, 8 years later, or I'm sure he wanted to have a job as as an actor. And I don't know, I have this feeling that it might have just gone drastically wrong, but yes, it did. And what I feel, what I would like to discover is about the community filmmaking, whatever was mentioned here, is the word tool. What happened in Russia, where they did in the 20s, they set up a train to give information, and they went through the whole Russia to tell them about the new socialist kind of ideas and whatever they could do to bring this country together. So there was the camera was considered as a tool. So in a way, it would be very good if people were given that instrument to say something about themselves, to bring it out, and somebody else is carrying this little information to somebody else. And Sylvester has been promoted almost by Frank to come out in the situation where he couldn't cope at all. But at least that, I feel, is something to find and bring out to the open and to make people aware of, that there are these capacities, there is this creativity, there is this urge, this longing for something, and that's what he portrays. So I think in terms of filmmaking, I'm almost waiting that I come across to people who use that tool.
Well, Andy, Did you make a film? Of Notting Hill?
You also made a film about Notting Hill Gate. We made videos, not film, in and around the community at the time Wilf made his film. It was an intervention, part of creating a political process. Very different from coming here as a filmmaker and that kind of situation.
So I actually lived in Notting Hill and was part of that.
And the point you're making, because you're having a different conversation, which is about the techniques used in filmmaking with children, which I also find quite fascinating, having been filming in 4 different settings, how the children respond to that, and how children play to the camera and not play to the camera. That's a whole different thing.
Let's say the most memorable was the least important to me. I made a science fiction Star War-like film with young people. The memorable thing was the process. What children do in video gives a whole perspective for adults.
What always sticks in my mind is that we invite someone to work who talk about participatory filmmaking. And so this guy came and said, well, let's give them cameras. One way of doing this.
I'll give you an example for that. It sticks in my mind. We worked with a bunch of guys, as filmmakers that is, in participating video. And one of these guys said to a teenager, let's shoot what is important to you. And this guy stood in the door that he goes through every morning, and the filmmaker said, let's make proper photos. But this was the door that every morning this boy kicked out. It is a very iconic picture of his life. You don't start with them as filmmakers. You start with their creativity and where they are.
Completely missed by someone who was thinking in conventional filmmaking, we need to make them to be filmmakers. Well, that's not where you start. You don't start with people to be filmmakers. You start with people's creativity and work from where they're at.
I mean, I find that really difficult because I spend most of my time doing admin and fundraising for projects. So then when I'm actually with young people, I'm still in that mode and I find myself acting as a careers advisor. And I know fuck all about careers. That's not what, I'm out of practice. It's true that there are still adventure playgrounds or occupying more sort of fringe style, but there are increasingly more places which have a very sort of professional image, and increasingly they're more and more like formal educations, but there's also somebody there giving 10-year-olds advice really on their career. It might just be their homework, but it's also definitely about their career and a way to get out of the estate where the centre might be. And I don't know which came first, because I do find that a lot of the work that I might do with young people has to have an atmosphere, like a sort of professional aesthetic and a promise that what they're going to get from the experience is going to be useful to them. I find that from parents as well, and that there is an expectation now, and I don't know which came first, whether the regulations put on those sorts of provisions came first, or whether parents demanded it, and they don't want second class, and they don't want their kids to be rolling around in the mud. They want their children to be going to good schools in nice school uniforms and to get somewhere, and you can't argue with that necessarily, so I'm constantly trying to find a middle ground.
Well, I think what you're saying is very interesting to me. Firstly, because I always had difficulties with school, and I can tell you my life story. I mean, I'm not very easy with anything to do with school. Secondly, I was brought up after war, after escaping from the Russians, and everything was nothing. In 1945, I was 4. It was the year 0 in Germany. I went to school like every child in Germany, even now, when I was 6, much later than in England. Did that put me back? I built sheds and ruins and gardens. What did I lose out of? Learning is much more professionalized now, and very early here in England. Why? You're pressed into a certain kind of intellectual expectation, and behind this is to educate people to make money and eventually to compete with others, and to compete with the poorer parts of the world? What happens to those who can't follow that trend or just want and need something else? And what does playing mean in all that? That is what I'm interested in.
It's very hard to talk about the biggest achievement in the last 10 years when I worked on a lot of social projects like yourself with young people, and a lot of them were about making films with young people.
The most interesting thing about making films in the last 10 years with young people for me is that the 3 or 4 people who became attached to me hadn't any money for it. They hung around and dropped out of school when they were 16 in Tower Hamlets. But they were hanging out at this place I worked at. At least in that environment, there was space to develop somehow, and they were incredibly bright people.
But that was a kind of bringing up process, with none of which, because the organisation wanted to see all those outputs, jobs applied for, skills acquired, all this kind of stuff. And it was the informal part of them and their self-learning, because obviously the system couldn't contain them. But that, at least within that provided a little space for them development. I'm constantly in conflict, because I know parents, that's what parents want, and that's what...
I am constantly in conflict with what the parents want from me being an art teacher. What we offer as video makers is a small platform of the American dream, but we are still underground. We don't surface and don't make money. It is terrible, but it is also creative.
There's a whole history of intervention in children's lives by people who felt that they know what would be good and appropriate for children's lives. Like the National Trust came from Olivia Webb, who was the wife of a pastor, fairly affluent family, looking at children in the East End of London and saying, these children are ill, they have no green spaces. What they need is green spaces. But that's gone full cycle in the last 18 months, with a guy called David Bond deciding he's the marketing director for Nature. And has made a film saying children need to come out to nature. But it's great if you're white middle class. For the black inner city kid, this is irrelevant. So there's that cycle. The 91 cycle for me, 91, 92, was when the Tory government at that time developed the Out of School Initiative and the vast growth in out of school provision. But the reason for the vast growth in out of school provision was because adult parents, the mothers, needed to get back to work. So everything has an economic value. And that's really where we are, for me, where we are today. If you have no economic value, then you are not worth considering. Sylvester will be dead. Because there is this whole underclass or third world economy, this whole world that, and I won't cry, but I'm really, it's heart-wrenching for me, because that's about the politics of it.
You see, and Frank at that time told me, and that he put it into his thesis, that Notting Hill Gate was appreciated by the people who came as workers from, Cayman Islands or Jamaica or whatever, for a while, until there was no need for them anymore. The market was fulfilled, there was no need anymore. And then the problem really started.
There's always been that history with immigrant communities, people coming in because they're cool. I mean, we're in,
There was always that story. I am obviously more interested in the question about the children. Adventure playgrounds in this country started in 1947. They were built on bomb sites. Buildings were pulled down because they were not safe. Parents went to those places to make them safe, after the children had left. The Forest Commission recently said about fires in the forest, don't remove that, just make it safe. Think about that and how to do it. That is really positive. And to Olivia, the adventure playground is for children to play, not for an outcome. That is the biggest difference between youth work and play work.
Children are using these places anyway to play and to experience. And that's the big difference between youth work and play work, is that the play workers aren't outcome oriented.
Yeah, but I don't...
As a profession.
I think it's also the relationship between the play workers and the young people. I don't know, it's not just play, and what spoke to me about what you were saying was the length of time that the relationship you had with these young people spanned, and that's really rare now, especially when youth work is becoming more and more careerist, and you have to have a degree to do certain work, and and it's really competitive now. If you look, rather than the longevity of spending, just time.
Hanging out. I mean,
just hanging out. I know. You have to get funding for hanging out.
Yeah, and the whole of the community doing work within the community. Hanging out time is absolutely essential. So if you think you can do it on a 40-hour week, you're not going to do it.
I mean, it's a massive conversation that the playwork sector is currently engaged in. About what is playwork, what is the future of playwork, where does playwork going? So you've got Simon Ricks, who you might know from Notting Hill times, late 60s, Anarchy, setting up the carnival, who's now running an adventure playground in Bromsgrove. But for him, his work is as much about getting food on people's tables at home and creating those links and working with the local authorities as it is about the children in the playground.
Yeah.
Whereas Mark Howden at Glamis is very much about what's happening to the children in the playground and what we're doing in the playground. So there's the whole dilemma in the playwork sector about where it goes. Who cares?
I just want to say, I just want to make some tea. If anyone wants to break, they can carry on. Of course, just continue. But I'm going to make some tea. Please carry on.
Would you make some coffee as well?
I will really make some coffee. Yeah. So carry on, please.
I wonder about the difference of child and adult as a therapist, psychologist.
In the sense, if we think about a thing like the unconscious and the fact that we can dream, and that's a bit of a cliche, I suppose, in some senses, but it does strike me that the power of imagination to help a dream, things like that. If I go back to another element, when I was watching the film, and kids just seemed to be doing something totally unproductive or anti-productive. So this afternoon, I was on the floor in a playroom, laid down, tossing a balloon backwards and forwards. And then
this afternoon I was balancing balloons with adults and myself. It is like play without concept.
You think, for fuck's sake, I spent 45 minutes laid on my back, batting a balloon backward and forward. But within that sense, though, there is a sense of a communication of unconsciousness going on. There's a relaxation, there's a to and fro, and there's all kinds of dynamics that are happening through that play, which doesn't necessarily have, like you're saying, any outcome or object.
Well, that's the game of being able to identify the like hidden kind of meanings and things, and I think other people who might want to just do those sorts of activities might not have vocabulary or the kind of practice to protect,
certain experiences don't have a vocabulary. This is what's also quite interesting. It's interesting thinking about play work and youth work, and how it started off in housing, and sort of in the 80s, all these little free-ish zones of work got clamped down, so right down to the therapeutic recently, the government trying to intervene. So I'm just trying to add across the social sectors, if you will, play work, youth work, housing, all the housing corps that were there, so it's like this massive clamp down of all these spaces, these kind of spaces where you could work / play constructively.
The problem is anything that's considered.
Education is crucial. Play, work, social work, all is crucial. The problem is, play is not productive, has no value, so who pays you to do it?
The book's called No Fear. You're growing up in a risk-averse society. So in practice, a lot of my work is around combating this tendency to sort of overprotect children. And the link there with learning education is that that's, in my view, partly driven by adults underestimating children's competencies and underestimating, basically having what the sociologists would call a sort of deficit model of childhood.
In May 2014, I came across a report of an adventure playground near Wrexham, about 20 minutes from where I live. I found this after our discussions, but feel right to include clips here.
This waste ground was turned into the land last year with recycled and donated materials. On one of Wales's most economically deprived estates, it's been a big success.
I think that a lot of playful behaviour can sometimes be perceived as antisocial behaviour, and the land does provide a space where children can create and they can destroy. If they've had a really bad day, they can come here and they can let it out.
I like coming to the land because it's better than playground, and when you're outside you usually get bored and you usually want to come here.
Is it dangerous sometimes?
Always.
Danger isn't something they shy away from. Here you learn about risk by taking the plunge. The idea is that they get to build and destroy. Nothing is permanent. There are always play workers on hand, but they know their place. Are there any rules here?
Not really.
Yeah, we allow children to play with fires, just like they did 400,000 years ago. Emotionally, their confidence, it makes them feel good.
There are just a handful of other schemes like this across the UK. Convincing every town to open a land would involve a huge leap in what we think a playground should be. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Wrexham.
So, for me, as a play worker, my sole reason for existence is about providing opportunities for children to play. My understanding of children's play is they're doing what they want to do because they want to do it, for no extrinsic reason whatsoever. So the moment I start saying to them, here's a camera, start taking some pictures, so I can promote the setting or talk to people about what we're doing, I'm actually stopped being a play worker because I'm putting my agenda in. So in order for it to happen, what I have to do is leave the gear lying around in the hope that they might decide to pick it up and play with it. And that might mean that it gets crushed physically, because that actually might be the play that's on their agenda that day. It might be destructive play. That's
I agree, leaving
skill.
the equipment out
Wonderful skill.
and then being there ready to sort of maybe show them how to. I suppose for me it's about empowerment, so how can I make myself devoid of them being dependent on me to provide them with those experiences? How can they just be able to have those experiences without me?
I asked the question. It's one that perplexes me and worries me, the whole power thing, and how the adult releases the power that is inherent to them being an adult. How do we get to that point where I'm invisible?
I guess it kind of gets to different places. I don't that's not my intention. It's like what can I learn from them and what can they learn from me, and how can we grow together, and how can this be somehow productive for anyone in whatever way they want, I suppose. Pardon?
What you're saying is great. Do you think you can be an us when when children's perceptions of adults is socially ingrained by the education system?
Like I did a project this year with lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and queer kids, and I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing it if I wasn't gay myself. And when I work with like 12-year-old kids who live in council estates and stuff, I never did that. So I'm like what's fun here? Like what do you do? Like how do you make fun? And that's kind of where we begin the conversation.
Four Corners was quite announced to the producer being the subject. Paul Hallam, gay himself, points out the confusion that occurs in the relationship with young people to the point of dissolution.
So the Four Corners that still exists, that's very different.
Does Four Corners still exist?
Oh, no, it doesn't exist in that way. It is difficult to explain what Four Corners was. Ron Peck said, working with Four Corners was to be continually arguing, defending and challenging. I feel it was possibly a bit like that here tonight. Our evening could be called a Four Corner session, because nothing was taken for granted. The only thing different is, as a film crew, we reflected on the process of filmmaking. And that often included unresolved discussions, and we admitted to these complexities.
Four Corners, but there has been a major transition starting almost 1992. As a film and media workshop, it provides training outside a creative-based model. To survive, it moved into training for industry and to create jobs. None of it is bad, but it is down to the exclusion of more free spaces, if you like, in creativity and political power.
I found it really interesting watching the film, however.
It was interesting seeing the two films we saw today, made in 1973, together. The colour Super 8 film, when I saw the children playing with fire, puddles, throwing stuff into the puddles, moving boxes around and the climbing and the running, all this and adult interaction would nowadays be done with much more care. I say that because there was one boy thrown by a play worker. Play workers would approach that side still, but making sure that the adults are aware of what they are offering.
It's not a small site, and the kids do that with the fire. The puddles and throwing stuff into the puddles, moving boxes around, and the climbing and the running and the height and all of that. That's all still happening. The adult interaction, the actual physicality of it, would be done with more care. Is there more?
No, I mean, if there is more, then to the question of adventure, to the question of creativity, to the question of love and, doing something with care and love, to the question of architecture and space, to the question of classroom, being in a sort of classroom situation, to the question of fear and anger. So these are all things that I'm interested in and have collected material.
I'm also really interested in that, and I'm so
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.